5 years ago. My sister told my parents I dropped out of medical school. One lie. That's all it took to erase me from my own family. Interesting thing about abandonment. Sometimes it doesn't happen slowly. Sometimes it happens in one 4-minute phone call while you're sitting beside a dying friend's hospital bed. My name is Irene Ulett. 32 years old. Chief of Trauma Surgery at Mercy Crest Medical Center. But 5 years ago, I was just a terrified third-year med student sitting in an oncology ward at 11 p.m. with $46 in my bank account and no idea my sister was destroying my life back home in Connecticut. Interesting, honestly. Because betrayal works best when the victim is distracted surviving something else. My older sister Monica had always been the daughter who mattered. School plays. Perfect hair. Dinner party charm. The kind of woman who could make strangers feel special within 30 seconds. My parents adored her for it. Dad valued appearances. Mom valued peace. Monica gave them both exactly what they wanted. Interesting thing about favored children. They learn early that likability can become power if used correctly. I was the quiet one. Biology textbooks during Thanksgiving. Science fairs nobody attended. Straight A's that disappeared beside Monica's personality somehow. Not hated. Worse. Overlooked. Interesting, honestly. Because children can survive cruelty easier than invisibility sometimes. Then I got accepted into medical school. Oregon Health and Science University. 3,000 miles from Hartford. And for one brief shining moment, my father finally looked at me with pride. Maybe you'll make something of yourself after all. Not warmth. Not love. But when you grow up starving emotionally, even scraps taste enormous. Interesting thing about neglected daughters. We mistake recognition for affection because we've spent our whole lives surviving on tiny portions of both. Monica noticed the shift immediately. Of course she did. Interesting, honestly. Because people who build identities around attention always feel the spotlight moving before anyone else does. Suddenly she called more often. Asked questions. Remembered details. Wanted to know my professors' names. My roommates. My schedule. I thought she was finally becoming my sister. What I was actually doing was handing her ammunition. Interesting thing about manipulators. They rarely gather information aggressively. They let trust deliver it voluntarily. Third year of med school. My best friend Sarah got diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 26 years old. No family. No safety net. Just me. Interesting, honestly. Because life has horrifying timing sometimes. I filed an official leave of absence through the university. 1 semester. Caregiver documentation. Everything approved formally. Everything legitimate. I moved into Sarah's apartment. Drove her to chemo. Held her hair while she vomited into hospital basins at 3 in the morning. Sat beside her during pain spikes so brutal she could barely speak. And somewhere inside all that exhaustion, I made one catastrophic mistake. I told Monica. Interesting thing about betrayal. It almost always enters through the door you voluntarily unlocked yourself. She sounded compassionate immediately. Oh my God, Irene. Pause. Take all the time you need. Another pause. I won't tell Mom and Dad. They'll just worry. 3 days later. She called them anyway. Except she didn't tell the truth. Interesting, honestly. Because lies survive longest when they contain just enough reality to feel believable emotionally. The phone call came at 11 p.m. Sarah asleep behind the curtain. Hospital monitors humming softly. Dad's voice cold enough to stop my breathing instantly. Your sister told us everything. Everything. Interesting thing about vague accusations. They force innocent people to defend themselves before they even know the crime. The dropping out. The boyfriend. All of it. I stood so fast the chair nearly flipped backward. Dad, what are you talking about? Monica showed us proof. Proof. Interesting, honestly. Because once people want to believe something, fabricated evidence becomes terrifyingly effective. I filed a leave of absence. I can send the paperwork. I can give you the dean's number. Mom got on the line crying. How could you lie to us for a year? Lie. Interesting thing about family narratives. Once the story forms emotionally, facts stop mattering almost immediately. I'm sitting in a hospital right now taking care of Sarah. Monica said you'd say that. That sentence nearly destroyed me more than the accusation itself. Because suddenly I realized my sister had prepared them against the truth in advance. Interesting, honestly. Because the best manipulators inoculate people against reality before reality arrives. Dad's final words before hanging up. Don't call this house until you're ready to tell the truth. 4 minutes. 12 seconds. That's how long it took my parents to erase me. Interesting thing about family rejection. Sometimes the grief hits before the silence even starts. 20 minutes later. A text from Monica. I'm sorry, Irene. I couldn't keep your secret anymore. Broken heart emoji. Like betrayal decorated itself kindly enough to become mercy somehow. Interesting, honestly. Because manipulative people always want credit for the pain they caused gently. I called my parents 14 times over the next 5 days. Blocked. Emailed documentation. Ignored. Mailed handwritten letters. Returned unopened. Asked Aunt Ruth to intervene. Dad hung up on her too. Interesting thing about abandonment. Eventually you realize people aren't misunderstanding you. They're choosing someone else's version of you instead. And the worst part? This wasn't new. Not really. This was every ignored science fair. Every forgotten achievement. Every moment Monica's word mattered more than mine. Compressed into one final irreversible decision. Interesting, honestly. Because family betrayals rarely begin with the betrayal itself. They begin years earlier in smaller moments nobody stops. Family betrayals rarely begin with the betrayal itself. They begin years earlier. In smaller moments nobody stops. Interesting thing about rejection. The final wound only hurts because the body remembers every earlier cut first. I tried everything after that phone call. 14 calls in 5 days. 2 emails with official university paperwork attached. 1 handwritten letter mailed priority from Portland. Every single attempt disappeared into silence. Interesting, honestly. Because blocked communication becomes its own kind of funeral eventually. The 4th phone call went straight to voicemail. By the 6th, Dad had blocked my number entirely. Mom followed 2 days later. I remember staring at the screen in Sarah's hospital room thinking, people who truly love you usually fight to understand before they decide to abandon you. Interesting thing about silence. Eventually it stops feeling temporary and starts feeling official. Sarah died 6 weeks later. 2:14 a.m. Rain against the oncology windows. My hand wrapped around hers while morphine softened the final panic in her breathing. Interesting, honestly. Because losing your best friend while your family refuses to answer your calls changes something fundamental inside you permanently. I buried her alone. No parents beside me. No sister. Just 12 people under gray Oregon skies and a priest mispronouncing her last name during the service. And honestly, that was the first day I stopped trying to go home emotionally. Interesting thing about abandonment. Eventually survival becomes quieter than grief. I returned to medical school 3 weeks later. Exhausted. Broke. Numb enough to function. Interesting, honestly. Because trauma turns routine into life support. Classes. Clinical rounds. Night shifts. Coffee. Sleep deprivation. Repeat. I stopped checking my phone hoping for family messages after month 4. Stopped rereading old texts. Stopped defending myself to people who already preferred Monica's version. Interesting thing about healing. Sometimes it begins the exact moment you stop begging to be believed. Then came residency. Trauma surgery. 90-hour weeks. Blood beneath fingernails. Pager alarms at 3 a.m. The kind of exhaustion that leaves no emotional energy for heartbreak afterward. Interesting, honestly. Because purpose can temporarily numb wounds therapy hasn't reached yet. And during all those years, Monica flourished back home. At least publicly. Instagram vacations. Wine tastings. Charity galas with my parents smiling beside her like nothing had happened. My Aunt Ruth occasionally sent updates. Carefully. Like someone delivering information into a war zone. Interesting thing about extended family. They often know the truth long before they feel brave enough to say it aloud. She tells people you had a breakdown. Aunt Ruth whispered once during a Christmas phone call. Pause. That med school became too much. I laughed when she said it. Actually laughed. Not because it felt funny. Because eventually lies become so outrageous they circle back into absurdity emotionally. Interesting, honestly. Because manipulators always escalate the story after realizing nobody challenged the first version. According to Monica, I dropped out. Moved in with a boyfriend. Developed substance issues. Refused help. And honestly, the worst part wasn't the lie itself. It was how easily everyone accepted it. Interesting thing about family reputations. People believe the story matching your assigned role fastest. Monica, the responsible daughter. Irene, the disappointing one. Simple. Convenient. Finished. By year 3. I became chief resident. Youngest trauma fellow in the program. Published twice in surgical journals. My attending physicians called me relentless. Patients called me calm. Nobody back home knew any of it. Interesting, honestly. Because sometimes success feels strangely lonely when the people who once needed to see it chose blindness years earlier. Then came the article. March 2024. Medical Journal Northwest. Dr. Irene Ulett leads revolutionary trauma response protocol. Photo included. Professional headshot. White coat. Mercy crest badge visible clearly beneath my name. Interesting thing about truth. It eventually escapes containment on its own. The article spread faster than I expected. Hospital social pages. Medical forums. LinkedIn. One of my former Connecticut classmates shared it publicly with the caption. Remember when people said Irene Ulett dropped out? Interesting, honestly. Because exposure usually begins accidentally. Aunt Ruth called me the next morning sounding breathless. Your mother saw the article. Silence. Huge silence. And? She fainted. I stared at the hospital parking garage concrete wall for several seconds. Not satisfaction. Shock. Interesting thing about buried lies. The people protecting them often believe them themselves eventually. Your father's furious. At me? No. Pause. At Monica. First crack. After 5 years. The first crack. Interesting, honestly. Because false realities collapse incredibly fast once undeniable evidence enters the room. Apparently Dad drove directly to Monica's condo holding printed screenshots from the article. No warning. No phone call. Just rage. What is this? Monica tried denial first. Of course she did. Interesting thing about habitual liars. Their first instinct is almost always confidence. She probably manipulated the publication. Dad showed her the hospital website. Faculty listings. Research credentials. Board certifications. Then came the university transcripts Aunt Ruth later described as the moment Monica stopped breathing normally. Interesting, honestly. Because paperwork destroys fabricated narratives brutally fast. Monica finally admitted part of the truth after 3 hours. Not all. Never all. Just enough to survive temporarily. She confessed that I'd taken leave for Sarah. But claimed she only misunderstood the situation. Misunderstood. Interesting thing about manipulative people. They rename calculated cruelty into confusion once consequences arrive. Then Dad asked the question that finally shattered everything. Why did Irene send us official paperwork we ignored? Silence. Long silence. Because there is no harmless explanation for that part. Interesting, honestly. Because lies become impossible to maintain once someone starts examining the timeline instead of the emotions. That's when Monica broke completely. Not remorse. Fear. Huge difference. She always made me feel invisible. There it was. Finally. Not concern. Not misunderstanding. Jealousy. 20 years of it. Interesting thing about golden children. Sometimes they panic hardest once attention shifts away from them even briefly. She was supposed to fail. Dad reportedly sat down after that sentence. Just sat down slowly like his legs stopped functioning correctly. Because for the first time in 5 years, he realized something horrifying. His favorite daughter destroyed the other one deliberately. And he helped her do it, for the first time in 5 years. My father realized his favorite daughter destroyed the other one deliberately. And he helped her do it. Interesting thing about guilt. Real guilt doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives quietly enough to hollow people out from the inside first. Dad called me 3 times that night. I watched the phone vibrate across my kitchen counter while scrubbing blood from beneath my fingernails after a 14-hour trauma shift. Hartford, Connecticut. Caller ID. Dad. Interesting, honestly. Because sometimes the people who abandoned you suddenly reappear expecting forgiveness to survive exactly where they left it. I didn't answer. Not the first call. Not the second. By the third. He left a voicemail. His voice sounded older. Smaller somehow. Irene. Long pause. We made a terrible mistake. Interesting thing about apologies. They lose enormous weight once they arrive years after the damage already reshaped someone's life permanently. I sat alone in my apartment listening to the voicemail 3 times. Not crying. Not angry. Just tired. Huge difference. Because eventually grief exhausts itself into numbness. Then came Mom's message. A.